Hey everybody, welcome to another chapter of Hyper-Borea. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment. Also, if you're enjoying this audio experience, please consider hitting the Amazon link in the description and buying a copy of the book. The Amazon Kindle version is only $2.99. Even if you don't own a Kindle, buying that for $2.99 would sure help a lot. I appreciate you guys and thank you, and I hope you enjoy this chapter. Chapter 11. I was a passive observer. I knew this was a dream. I was in the air as a bird over a low cinder cone volcano, as it gushed smoke into the sky. In the distance were several mountain peaks. I could count 6, forming a semicircle with an open caldera. Pine trees were scattered, bunched here and there. These weren't like the healthy pine forests of Alfheim. This was somewhere else. I believed I was still in Arizona. Yes, the distant peaks had to be the San Francisco peaks I had seen pictures of on Sean's glass screen. The soil was patchy, black and ashy here and there, red elsewhere and finally brown. I descended the distant deserts at the edges of the horizon, disappearing as I sank in elevation toward the slowly erupting volcano, appearing to be at the end of her belching. The lava streams were small, only spilling out of one direction of the mountain, leaving it approachable at certain angles. I knew this place. I had read about it. Where was I? It had to do with the sun. I was low enough now to see several ants that must have been people standing at the base of the erupting crater. That was it. Sunset Crater. My memory was coming to me then, in this dream-like state. 340 meters high, erupting around 1085 AD, whatever that date meant. What was I doing here? I was low enough now to be among the crowd, their skin brownish red. It was morning, the sky overcast, and a light snowfall. No, that was ash. The men and women around me wore cloth-spun fabrics of varying colors, but earthy in tone. The men wore long hair, none possessed beards. Just as I had read about. They varied in age, but no one below adulthood was present. I counted them, perhaps 15. I was not in control of my field of view, as I stated. I was merely passive in my observance. All members of this group were gazing upward, the massive column of smoke billowing, contouring here and there with the wind like a living creature. It was ominous. I had seen eruptions before. Volcanoes formed the archipelago of Alfheim, of course. This, however, had an energy about it. It was malicious. The faces of those around me were creased, some with worry, others with disgust. Someone spoke, a woman, a very old woman. "They are here, Chief, just like in your dream." I had hoped I would be wrong. The man who had replied fidgeted with a knife hilt on his belt. It was beautifully crafted and decorated. Besides this tell, he was otherwise placid in appearance. Had he not been reaching for his weapon? None could have known his mind without reading it. From the smoke came 6 dots, descending the steep crater slowly. They were spaced evenly apart, none moving faster than the other. It was a time before they were visible, observable, a little more than halfway down the face of the small mountain. In stark contrast to the clothing of the group below, those backdropped in smoke wore the skins of animals. I tried to remember the names: coyote, elk, fox, eagle, owl. Oh, that was spooky. As they drew closer, I observed a couple had the heads of those creatures, some twisted animal hybrid. The 6 were raggedy, filthy, and the ones with human expressions appeared to have just woken from a deep sleep. Their eyes red and veiny, their movements awkward and slow. They appeared to stumble. "I had hoped the legends would stay legends," the chief spoke, as the 6 were not 50 steps away. There came no response. When they were between 5 or 10, he spoke again as they came to a halt. Return to your hell pit from where you came from." "Have you kept the binding dance?" One of the smokemen in the center stepped 1 foot forward, speaking for the group. He smiled crookedly, knowing the answer to his question. He had a bare, fat torso, unlike mine, and was very sickly. He wore a torn skirt of hides, the fur matted and sticky in some parts. His long black hair was tangled, and his face dirty. He didn't seem to mind. The chief's response was an upturned nose and an even deeper frown. The woman who had first spotted the six responded, "It has fallen out of practice in the past few generations." The leader of those covered in furs laughed then, turned slightly to face his compatriots, who began laughing as well. Those with animal faces and beaks laughed too, their voices hoarse and scratched. 1,000 years we have slept, sealed and bound to that volcano. Your ancestors insisted we would be there forever, bound by rock and time, by each generation remembering their parents' ways. But you have finally forgotten. You have loosed us, and where we failed with your ancestors, we will succeed now. You will not, the chief spat defiantly. 2 men to either side of him drew blades, the metal dark black, and not metal at all, obsidian set in bone. "Strike, chieftain, strike at us, and let us devour you all," the leader spoke again. There was a silence, then the chief spoke. "Let them go. There is nothing we can do to stop them." His voice was firm. Being a trained manipulator, I detected something more in that command. It was subtle. He had a plan. "The last wise decision you will ever make," the smoke man mocked. "Quetz, bring it to me." Oh, where are we? Had I possessed a body, the flesh would be bubbly now with goose pimples. A scrawny man with fangs jutting from his mouth brought forward a staff. I hadn't detected it before, it being on the periphery of my sight line. It was glowing. It was magic. An aura, soft, but as the leader of the beastmen reached out and grabbed it, it shone like the rising sun. He looked over the crowd that had come to meet them, his countenance still that of mockery. "Go, chief. Make your plans to stop us. The age of man has set, the sun blot out by night. It is now the time of the moon, and the skinwalkers shall rule." Another maniacal laugh as the 6 drew together in a huddled mass, then a bright blue flash of light, and they vanished. A silence hung in the air, then the chief spoke. "We have no time to waste." He turned to a younger man, early on in adulthood. "Go, run back to the village and gather the fastest. Warn them all of what happened here. Warn them and direct them to all other tribes. Do not attack the skinwalkers. They are still bound by our ancestors' magic. They cannot attack us until we attack them. Every man, woman, and child must know this. We can make time we will use to find someone who still knows the dance. Go! Go now! Remember what I have told you." I was giddy as I awoke to a clouded sky. Still dark, the sun was yet to rise for another couple of hours. But I was giddy. The artifact, I had glimpsed it. A staff, but not just any staff. Teleportation. A spell not known by any caster in any realm that Alfheim's masters had ventured to. A talented caster such as myself could disappear and reappear a few feet away, but nothing of this scale. This was historic, yes. It was also the perfect artifact to defeat the Dark Ones with. What had happened to these skinwalkers? I did not know. I was sure to find out, though, as I closed in on such a marvelous prize. Artifacts had a long memories associated with them, sort of like a magical bill of sale. One could see the previous owners and channel back some of the memories associated with them. But it wasn't my excitement that had woken me. No, it was something else. My nostrils inhaled the familiar dusty smell that permeated this region. The air possessed just a touch of chill. What was different? What had woken me? Movement? No. Noise? No. It was the opposite of these. An absence of movement, an absence of noise. Not a bird chirped, not a cricket sang. That could only mean one thing. As if punctuating my epiphany, one of my wards exploded. I sat up bolt straight. North! North! The witch was striking from the north! I was out of my blankets in less than a second, my feet finding my jeweled slippers, and my eyes shifting to that horizon. A cloud of fire blazed smokeless in the night. Boom! A wave of heat shook the tents as the secondary ward went off. Gilruel had found us, but more. She had crossed into Sedona and the Red Rocks. What would she awaken there? I shivered at the thought of these skinwalkers. That was a price she would pay, though, as she now would funnel her horde down the wash in great numbers, unaffected by the filtering trees and cactus that protected our flanks. She meant to overwhelm me. "Is she here?" Sean was out of his tent, shoving feet into shoes as the others returned to the waking world as well. Yes, and in a matter of seconds, this campsite will be swarmed by the mindless. Children, get in the car and drive back to the road. I could see one now, a teenager, sprinting out of the dark, down the center of the wash. I snapped, and the campfire illuminated brightly, the teen's black eyes and bile-covered face in full light now. Quickly, children, run! I sent a bolt of arcane energy straight toward the teen, the purple streak of energy striking his shoulder instead of his head. I must still have been waking up. The teen, however, would never wake, as his shoulder, arm, head, and half his chest exploded. My team stood, staring in abject horror, the wash now filling with the zombies of Gilruel, dozens of them. Run! I screamed the order. They ran then, piling into the Suburban. Only partially focused on them, I heard the engine roar to life, the headlights illuminating juniper trees and cactus, and faces of the ghouls beyond as they descended on us from all sides. There were so many, where did she get them all? I held out my arm, and my ingredients bag flew to me, wrapping over my shoulder and cinching tight. I began my work, firing bolts of fire, arcane energy, and lightning at the incoming enemies. They exploded one by one, but as one returned to the god of death, another took his or her place. I snapped, and what Kyle had told me was a cooler skidded free from its place beside a tent, and the lid flipped open. What I would have called an ice box was filled to the brim with cubes of frozen water and plastic bottles of the same substance. Among metallic cans of sugar fizz, the ice filled my ingredients bag, and I released waves of arctic wind from my palms to temporarily halt the progress of those coming from the wash. The Suburban was off now, honking as it plowed through bodies and down the dirt road. I heard a gurgling, guttural noise as footsteps running toward me from behind. I turned and saw young Caleb, who had his sword ready and cut down a zombie before it reached me. Had he not been there, I could have been thrown to the ground by the ghoul. Maybe this runt was not a liability after all. I told you to get in the car, I smiled. We are cardinals! Caleb shook with fear as two of the mindless sprinted forward. Cardinals never retreat! He screamed and stepped toward them, in one motion severing the legs of one, then the head of the other. He then swept low, slicing the delimbed enemy's head in two. I was impressed, to say the least, but could not waste time in admiration. The people were spilling forth from every open space around the campsite, their gurgling and panting the only noises in the darkness besides their footfalls in the soft desert soil. They were from all walks of life, some dressed as seamen, some in black fabric with neckties, others in what I guessed would be suits for bathing. Teenager, adult, even grandmother were blasted by my lightning, fire, and arcane explosions. I sent the servants of the witch to hell, one at a time, and in groups depending on the flow and rhythm of my casting. I varied my attacks to prevent predictability, launching several singular attacks while also lobbing cannonball-sized projectiles with wide areas of effect. The ingredients in my bag were at slim risk of running out. I had been prolific in my gathering. It was this distinction of a master versus acolyte, the punch of his sack. Acolytes, as all young people, like to impress with large displays of casting, with no long game in mind. Masters were trained to be meticulous. Plan for a foot, prepare for a furlong, was the saying. And as I had previously stated, the ingredients of this world were pure, pure, pure. Consider what Seaman had told me was a battery. His internet revealed them to me to be small vessels of electricity housed in metal and plastic. I was now using the power of this creation as a catalyst for my acid-based and electrical-based spells, all in one small ingredient. Magnificent. Sovos? Young Caleb called out from behind. I was suddenly conscious of his heavier breathing and a commotion behind me. I turned, and he was being held from behind by a rather fat man. Caleb's sword hand was free and hacking into the neck of a rather filthy-looking woman, who was attempting to help her compatriot carry my subordinate off. This would not do. I could not divide my attention, no. More and more people were coming, closing the gap with each passing thought. Quickly, act quickly. I used an air-based spell and sent the fat man tumbling hundreds of yards into the night, then snapped and exploded the woman's head with the same blood rush I had used at the tavern. Caleb screamed as blood and chunks of brain and skull peppered him. But I ignored that, too busy for the lad's whining. Channeling my shamanistic abilities, I formed a fist with my right hand and wove a spell around it with my left. then drove it into the ground. The clay beneath the soft topsoil below us jettisoned to the surface and formed a dome in the air, the clay slowly melding together to form a hemisphere with no gaps. Through the holes I saw them, the witch's army closing in around us, dozens and dozens still. They filled every gap in the foliage. There must have been 200 of them in total. Even the hole that had been blown through the cactus by the trajectory of the fat man was filled with fresh slaves. The clay closed off all sight as it melded together. Then the dome dropped over us with a thud. The outside world now muffled, the grunting and groaning of the slaves barely permeating. I was aware now only of the darkness that encased us, as the campfire was from without the dome, and the rapid breathing of Caleb as he sat up, and his frantic hands clung for his sword. Just minutes prior, Kyle, Sean, and Sylvia made their dead sprint for the Suburban, their hearts pounding as the ghouls began appearing out of the darkness and spilling into the campsite. They would make it to the car, but Kyle had seen enough zombie movies to know they needed to move quickly before the vehicle was overwhelmed. Before they were surrounded, the glass broken and each one of them dragged out and eaten alive. Are these things going to eat us? Kyle stole a glance at one, a woman hiker that couldn't have been much older than him. Her eyes were black and what looked like dry blood or black goo spilled from her nose. Her sole focus was on the wizard Sovos, but as she ran, she seemed to notice them and turned. No matter, her head exploded in a fireball as a spell found her. They were at the car, and Kyle tore the front passenger door open and all but shoved Sylvia in, then ran around the front, fumbling for the keys. He heard and made a mental note of Sean's door opening and closing, but glanced back once in the driver's seat to ensure he was there. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! They are coming, Kyle! Hurry! Sean was ballistic, unmoving. His body looked for any way to expend the adrenaline coursing through him. His hands fidgeted with everything. He couldn't sit still. His eyes were wild. Maybe it was Kyle's upbringing around his father, but in the face of this chaos and fear, he remained level. His firefighter father provided the template of cool operation in the face of dire stress. He was not immune, however, to the stress of the situation, his hands shaky as he fumbled with the keys. The Suburban roared to life, Sylvia's gaze directed to the exploding zombies as Sovos stood valiantly on the hill, firing off magic in rapid succession and felling enemy after enemy. Kyle jammed the transmission into drive and was about to put the pedal down to the metal when Sylvia stopped him. "Caleb?" She was not frantic like Sean, but fear lined her words. "Where is he?" "Oh no, I forgot." He turned. "Did they get him?" Kyle's heart sank. Please tell me he's not dead. There was a deep pit in his stomach now. "There!" It was actually Sean who spotted him. "He's fighting with Sovos!" "Do we stay? Do we go?" Sylvia followed with a question. Sovos said run, we run. Kyle looked for his friend's affirmation. They nodded, each of them, and he took his foot off the brake and accelerated down the dirt road. "Was that an explosion?" Jack was wide awake now at Lance's question. The back door to the surveillance van was open, and the rookie was outside, looking in the direction of the campsite. Mouth dry, eyes heavy from lack of sleep, the experienced special agent stepped out and followed his subordinate's gaze. Off in the direction the persons of interest had set up camp, a fireball lit up the sky. What the hell kind of artillery are they packing? There was a second explosion then, Jack naturally bracing himself on the door, waiting for a shockwave that never came. Weird. The fire doesn't seem to be growing. With the desert this dry, he expected a fire to spread quickly out here. Get the fire department on the line and tell them to stand by just in case things get out of control. Doug. Jack looked around. Where's Doug? The snoring from the front of the van gave away the linebacker agent's position. Ugh. Wake up, Doug, and then get on the drone. Kyle drove the quarter mile down the dirt road, speeding where he could, slowing down where he needed to. The road was compact dirt, with a few places where he needed to be mindful of tire traction. He was able to maintain a good speed. It looked different as the sun still was not up, the digital clock reading 4:02 in the morning. They rounded a corner, and the headlights illuminated the highway that they had turned off of and taken the dirt road from yesterday. They were free from the chaotic scene, free except for the line of soulless servants standing in a human chain, blocking the way. Oh, crap! Kyle stepped on the accelerator, his intent clear to Sean and Sylvia. Ram them! Ram them! Sean was between the front seats now, his voice crazed with adrenaline. No, look! Sylvia pointed out the man in the middle of the pack. It was Big Ed, standing 6'8" in the full glare of the headlights. Kyle had only a moment to think. He was going too fast now to stop. What had Sovos said about the witch's champion? He was empowered with extraordinary strength and resilience. Kyle gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. He ripped it to the right, and the Suburban complied. The vehicle shot into the embankment at 40 miles per hour and lurched up and found purchase, ripping through cactus and shrub alike. "Slow down!" Sylvia cried as they narrowly missed a thick juniper tree branch, slamming through the branches instead. The glass windshield cracked as a thicker arm whacked it. "Speed up!" Sean was staring out the back window. The taillights illuminated the champion, the chiseled face of the former Marine with eyes blacker than the sky and brow with furrowed intent. He was running nearly as fast as the SUV. "I've got headlights," Jack yelled into the van. Lance stopped fidgeting with the drone and glanced down the highway about 100 yards to the exit that the kids had taken to their campsite. Doug, now standing next to Jack, looked as well. Sure enough, down the road, lights were seen coming toward the highway. "Are those people?" Illuminated now was a human chain of maybe a dozen people blocking the dirt road. "Where'd they come from? I don't see a parked car," Doug said. "They're not slowing down," Lance called from the front seat. Sure enough, the Suburban came into view. Just when it looked to be at the point of no return, it jerked violently to the right and slammed into the embankment, through weight and speed, carrying over it, and disappearing into the desert. Of what they could see of the crowd of people linking arms, Jack, Doug, and Lance watched as the tallest man in the middle took off down the path the Suburban had carved at superhuman speed, the rest of the people following at a sprint. Do you still want the drone?" Lance called from the front seat, aghast at what they had just seen. "No. Everybody in the Jeep. Let's follow him." Kyle drove as fast as he could, high beams on, dodging cholla cactuses, juniper trees, prickly pear cacti, and all manner of desert flora. The Suburban jerked and bobbed as they nailed potholes and dinged near misses on woody desert plants. Kyle prayed any time they drove through sand, and the tires spun and spun, trying to maintain traction and momentum. "He's nearly got to us!" Sean screamed. "Find something in the back. Anything. There has to be a weapon." Sylvia went to unbuckle, but Kyle grabbed her hand and shook his head. Sean unbuckled now and climbed over the seats to scour the back row where they had camping supplies. Sylvia smiled at Kyle, then put his hand back on the steering wheel and continued in removing her harness. She crawled after her brother. "Oh no. Oh crap," Sean screamed as the back of the Suburban suddenly got heavier, the axle creaking and the back window shattering. "What's going on?" Kyle yelled back, not daring to take his eyes from the desert ahead. "He's on the back of the car. He's trying to climb in." Sean grabbed what he could find first, an extra tent pole that they had not used for their rain flies on their tents. He jabbed it over the trunk and into the face of Big Ed. Big Ed snarled and wrapped a meaty hand around the thin aluminum rod, tossing it out of the back of the vehicle. His other hand gripped the back of the Suburban where the window had been, bleeding as it found a hold on the shattered glass pieces. Sylvia was next, shoving another tent pole in the champion's face. Ed snarled again and gripped this pole, intending to throw it when his head was struck by a cast-iron frying pan from Sean. He released his grip on the pole, howling in pain, Sylvia taking the chance to hit him in the face with the pole aiming for his eyes. Every time he tried to grab one, he was hit by the other. They continued this dance, pausing here and there as the Suburban reeled left, then right, tossing them about as they narrowly missed trees and cacti. A side window shattered as a juniper branch tore into the vehicle. Kyle had narrowly missed that tree, his heart pounding, and sweat beating down his forehead. The tree had also taken his driver's side headlight. That was not good. They were now relying on the one on the passenger side. The sun was still below the horizon. They were headed east, the light just barely brightening the sky in that direction. They hit a divot in the sandy desert floor, and it was just enough to knock Big Ed off the back. "Yes!" Sean and Sylvia cheered in unison. They watched as Big Ed tumbled, then recovered, sprinting again after them, this time catching up quickly as they had slowed on the multiple sandy bunkers that they were now thumping over. "Buckle up!" Kyle yelled from the front seat as they zoomed over a big one, shaped like a ramp. They were in the air for 1 second, Sylvia and Sean buckling just in time for them to crash into the ground, the momentum forcing them up. Had they not been seatbelted, they would have surely struck their heads on the metal roof of the Suburban. "Oh no!" Kyle had no choice. He plowed through a thick bunch of creosote bushes, unable to slow down, and in the second that they were airborne, his heart sank as he screamed. They were off another embankment, though this one several feet high, over the wash. The big vehicle hit the soft dirt floor with a sickening crunch, then barreled into the thick, sandy embankment on the opposite side. Airbags deployed as their forward momentum was arrested, and the world turned black as each of the passengers' heads slammed into the seat in front of them. Inside the clay dome, I appreciated the relative silence to the incessant gurgling and grunting of the mindless slaves of the wicked Cirrus that had been assaulting our refuge for the past dozen or so minutes. I was in a little bit of a pickle here, with young Caleb staying behind to valiantly fight with me. I didn't have much time to consider my options. Dust fell on us as I heard the footfalls of the zombies climbing on top of our mud fort, their feet and fists pounding on the clay, trying to create a weak point from which they could burrow into this little Yuletide present and kill us. Caleb was on the ground in the dirt, curled into a ball, crying. I considered leaving him. No, I couldn't. The others would just be too upset to go on. Why couldn't he have just listened and retreated with his peers? I could have easily escaped as a bird by now. I sighed, audibly, but the selfish mutt did not even bother to glance in my direction. Ugh, leadership was such a chore. But I suppose the benefit to be reaped from this investment of time and labor was worthy. Caleb, get up. I conjured a mage light, a small orb flare that would float and follow us anywhere we walked for a predetermined amount of time. I had chosen just a minute for this one. We wouldn't need it long. We are going to die! Caleb took a break from sniveling to exclaim. No, we are not, I scolded. You are going to stand up and you are going to meet your destiny. I thought for a moment. How to motivate this man-child? My brain racked back and forth as I tried to remember some of the lines they had spoken about their favorite game of Skyrim. You see, Caleb, I did not want to say it earlier because I did not know who it was, but now I see in this moment that it is you. You are the one that is spoken of. Caleb sat up, wiping tears from his cheeks and leaving desert dirt where they had been. The lad was still covered in blood. What do you mean? You see, my quest was foretold by ancient prophets. They say the wizard shall travel far with a knight who shall be his guard. I do not think it fate that you came to me last night, begging to be turned into, how did you say it, the Cactus Knight? The boy's eyes were beginning to shimmer now, his countenance changing ever so slightly as courage began to well in his heart. You see, every master of magic is protected by a valiant knight, called a blade. They used to be a force that protected our emperor. Now they hunt down dragons, and serve as escorts for the dragon's natural enemy, the caster. I was producing at this point a fraud, commingling real concepts from my land with stories I had heard the children speak of their beloved video games. It was a gamble, but the boy was standing now, and it seemed to be paying off. Just like in Skyrim, he mumbled to himself, looking over his sword. Ah, yes, there it was. My sail had been sold. Young Caleb, do you accept the charge to fulfill your destiny, to become the Cactus Knight, to become the Wizard's Blade? I asked my questions with gusto, selling the whole farm with my tone and pitch. Yes, I agree. Good. Now when I snap my fingers, a series of events will unfold. First, this mound of clay will explode outward. Second, a spire of rock will rise 10 feet into the air below us. From the top I will reside on a platform, firing down fury upon these servants of the witch. You will guard a spiral ramp that twists its way around the spire and up to my platform. It should be easy, the ramp only large enough for one to come forward at a time. I will also armor you and enhance your reflexes, sharpen your sword. Caleb nodded his understanding. He bit his bottom lip, underlining his excitement. I have but one question. I turned, then dramatically, facing away from him, the only sound being the pounding fists all around us. Are you ready, Cactus Knight? My head turned, my eyes cast sideways toward him theatrically. Yes, he cheered. Then let us have our victory. I smiled. This would be fun. I snapped my fingers and chaos erupted. The clay dome exploded with a magnificent force and sent the dense crowd that had formed around it flying. Those that had been at the top of the dome flew through the air, probably hundreds of feet away. Those touching the bottom of the dome were cast back 50 steps. Everyone within 10 feet was killed instantly, the pressure causing their hollow organs to burst. Cactus flew to us and shifted shape to mold around Caleb's limbs and head until before me was a green spiky man armed with a sword. He stepped as close as he could to me without jabbing me with his spines, and we rose 10 feet above the desert floor as the living zombies began to stand and regain their bearings after the explosion. There were few left, maybe 5 dozen, but we were not out of the fire yet. Caleb assumed his position halfway down the spire, and the charge started. I shot spells left and right, focusing my whole concentration on the act, given my back was covered by the Cactus Knight, who hacked and slashed, his speed inhuman, and his blade cutting their flesh as if their bones were made of spongy cake. It was rather fun for both of us. I conjured a tornado of cacti and corpses, and it wheeled around, smacking zombies and taking them to the ground and to the air so that the ramp would not be overwhelmed. In a matter of minutes, there was none left, just quiet. It was not lost on me that this was the single largest loss of life, in the past century at least in this land. Kyle had reminded me of that. Did I feel guilt? No. Likely a third of these people were raised from some nearby graveyard. I could tell from their manner of dress, as well as their slower bodies. I chuckled to myself. That would be a real mystery to any of the investigating authorities. I think that's... Caleb paused to breathe. All of them, he panted. I snapped my fingers, and his cactus armor fell, revealing the runt boy beneath, covered in sweat, blood, and guts from head to toe. Hey, I like the armor. You won't like it as much when the spell enhancing your strength wears off, I informed. Now we have not time to waste. We need to see if your friends who actually listened to me made it away safely. Kyle came to first, his head splitting with pain, his ears ringing. The deflated airbag was in front of him, the windshield covered in sand. He blinked his eyes and they blurred. He blinked again and wiped blood off of his right eye. Sylvia? Sean? He mumbled, the past hour coming back to him. They had been running from someone. Something. The champion. Crap, he groaned. Looking back, he couldn't see or hear his friends. Crap, he said again, depressing the seatbelt release. It didn't budge. Crap, he exhaled, jamming it and tugging on the top. Come on, he jerked on it, trying to use his returning strength to get it loose. Kyle? Sylvia's voice was soft. Sean? Sean moaned. Oh no, Sylvia gasped as a window shattered. The side door opened and Sylvia was screaming. Sylvia! Kyle wrestled with his seatbelt, turning to see the champion of the witch crush the buckle of Sylvia with his hand and manhandle her from the car. She kicked and screamed, lashing out with her nails and fist. Kyle remembered his dad's seatbelt cutter in the center console and opened it, searching. The brute had Sylvia out of the vehicle now, and held her with one arm at a distance. With the other, he slapped her with an open palm, the force knocking her unconscious. He dropped her on the soft sand of the wash and reached in for Sean, who was barely coming to. No! Sean began kicking. No! Jack followed the tire tracks around cactus and juniper tree alike, as dawn gave her first hints of light on the horizon. It wasn't light yet, but if one looked west, they would see darkness. Looking east revealed the first glow of the sun, yet to rise. You saw the fight in the bar. What are we going to do if mind-controlled people come at us? Doug yelled over the wind of the open-top Jeep Wrangler. We do what we always do. If there is a clear and present imminent threat to life, we engage, Jack responded. You saw the footage. They chopped a guy's legs off, and he kept coming. They chopped his head off. He stopped, was Jack's only response. Aim for the head. We'll see who's been putting in hours at the range, Lance chimed in from the back. They came upon a bunch of creosote bushes with a suburban-sized hole punched between them. Jack slowed as he spotted a steep decline of 4 or 5 feet and a wash below. The car is dead ahead. Doug could see it over the lip of the embankment. Let's go on foot. Jack killed the ignition, leaving the keys inside in case they had to move quickly to chase. The 3 agents drew their pistols and moved forward in a triangle, with Jack in the front, flanked by Lance and Doug behind. They were down the hill and in the wash. 12 people were gathered around the Suburban, which was half buried in the opposite sandy embankment, about 20 yards ahead of them. The only light being the red from the taillights, and the sun, not yet visible, but illuminating the land with hues of purple and blue. 4 people were digging out the driver's side door, which was covered in sand, and 8 were waiting in reserve, by a huge man, about 6'8". The FBI agents recognized the man from the bar. That was Edward Green, also known as Big Ed. He had been identified using law enforcement databases, as had everyone else from that security footage. Ed was pulling one of the college kids out from the back seat of the Suburban, the adolescent kicking and screaming. On the ground was the one girl in the group, out cold. Was she dead? Jack wondered. Not stepping any closer, Jack called out, "Put him down, Ed!" All 13 people snapped their heads toward Jack and his two compatriots. "FBI freaks! Hands in the air! Everyone on your knees!" Doug bellowed in his deep voice. Nobody moved. The kid in Ed's arms continued to hit and kick, but each blow that landed did not seem to disturb the Goliath. Doug spoke again. "I said, everyone put your hands in the air and get on your—" He was cut off as a zombie stepped forward, slowly walking toward them. It was neutral in expression, a young man in hiking gear. Then he sprinted, closing the distance in seconds. "Stop!" Doug fired, planting a round between the man's eyes. The dead ghoul fell to the ground with a thud. Another man began to take a step forward, but stopped. Ed dropped the kid, who was then secured by 4 of the remaining 7 in reserve. "Aim high. We may have to kill them all," Jack muttered, so only the agents could hear. "Hands in the air, all of you!" Jack hollered again. "Don't take another step closer, Ed." Ed didn't listen. The former Marine walked slowly toward them. "We will shoot," Doug warned. "Don't do this, Ed," Jack pleaded, his voice firm. Ed kept walking toward them. Lance fixed his grip on his gun, his palms sweating. The oversized Marine took another step, then another. Then he broke into a jog. As he got closer and closer, Jack could see his eyes, as black as the night behind them. Jack fired, the bullet finding its mark. He couldn't miss at this distance, with the target coming right toward him. A dark spot appeared in the center of Ed's head, causing him to stop. Ed stood there, breathing somehow, then took another step, then another. Then he ran toward the agents. "Fire! Fire!" Jack emptied his magazine into the Marine. His face became pockmarked with bullet holes, but he kept coming. He twitched as more bullets assaulted his chest, neck, and head from the other agent's pistols, but he was not stopping. The monster grabbed for Jack, who jumped out of his way. The 4 not occupied with Sean were running now toward them, as the other 4 were still dragging Kyle out. Ed had eyes only for Jack. He kept grabbing for him, bending as Jack rolled about on the ground, thankful for all of those Brazilian jiu-jitsu conditioning classes he had taken. He knew that the Marine possessed supernatural strength with how easily he had been holding up Sean with one arm. He did not intend to let the beast touch him. Doug and Lance reloaded, but before Lance could fire, the 4 were there. Lance was punched and thrown to the ground. Doug raised his Glock and squeezed the trigger twice, dropping a woman and realigning his sights on another man before squeezing off 2 more shots. He then turned and aimed as 2 previously holding down Sean were now running toward the fight. Jack was on his knees now and threw his empty gun at Ed, who batted it away with a meaty hand. Agent Callahan crawled backward and rolled as Ed threw punches and stomped the ground where Jack had been just seconds ago. It was surreal, the soft sand making a thumping noise with each hit and dust flying in the air. The force from the man's punches were inhuman. Hell, the whole state of the man was inhuman. Why did he remain fighting when the others dropped so quickly? The ex-Marine was a haunting image, a real-life Frankenstein's monster with jet-black eyes and a face marked by bullet holes. From his wounds, blood the darkness of those eyes spilled, or gooped, rather. Jack rolled and looked for where the next punch would land, but he was relieved to see Ed had turned, but horrified when he realized that Doug wasn't watching his back. The linebacker of a special agent was sighting a second man who had released his grasp on the boy by the car and was running toward them. Big Ed, as if instinctually protecting his lesser allies, was approaching Doug. "Doug!" Jack yelled, getting to his feet with the intent to run and tackle the Marine if he could, but he was too slow. "Huh?" Doug turned, and his eyes widened as he stared at the 6'8" assassin right behind him. "Oh, shit!" was all he managed as Ed threw a nasty punch that connected with Doug's gut. There was a sickening crunch, and Doug was thrown backward 10 feet, tumbling, then lay limp. Kyle was out of the driver's side door then. The 4 ghouls who had been hammering away at the glass a second ago were now running after whoever had just showed up. Was it cops? Park rangers? Bureau of Land Management? The different agencies that oversaw federal lands and highways came to his mind first. The organizations his dad had talked about coordinating disaster responses with. It didn't matter. What mattered to Kyle at the moment was Sylvia. Was she okay? He was out of the Suburban, ducking and wincing as a gun went off. A body, or was it 2, maybe 3, falling down into the sand. Kyle found Sylvia and Sean laying lifeless on the ground, next to a big man in a suit. Whether he was a dead detective or a zombie, Kyle did not know. "Sylvia? Sylvia!" He shook her, but she did not respond. "Crap. Okay, what did Dad teach you?" He checked her for a pulse, held his fingers under her nose, and felt breath. Yes, and a pulse. She's alive! He shook Sean, glancing back quickly at the fight. There was a man being chased around the wash by the witch's champion. Another man was wrestling 3 zombies. "Come on, Sean, wake up!" Kyle slapped him a couple times after checking his breathing to make sure he was alive. Sean groaned but didn't open his eyes. "Wake up, Sean, we have to go!" He glanced back again. The law enforcement officer who had been fighting the 3 zombies was on the ground then, not moving, and 2 zombies were coming for him now, coming for Kyle. "No!" Kyle felt his side pocket. No sword. "Oh, no!" He looked down at Sylvia and Sean. "Sorry, Sean." His lip quivered. "We'll come back for you." He lifted Sylvia onto his shoulders, like his dad taught him, then took off up a low part of the embankment they had crashed into, and off into the desert. He ran past the cactus and juniper, running toward the sunrise, his breath heavy and his heart pounding, Sylvia motionless, swaying like the breeze on the trees. Jack juked Ed and ran back toward Lance, spotting Doug's gun on the ground. This had to work, otherwise they were dead. The last 2 of the freaks that had been fighting Lance had taken off toward the fireman's son, who was now carrying the girl up the embankment into the desert. Smart. That's what Jack should have been doing, but instead, the father and husband was going to die here. Mendoza would probably chew him out in hell. Lance was not moving, neither was Doug. They were either both dead or close to it. This situation was... What was the word Mendoza always used? Foobar. "There's the gun." Jack spotted it. The 2 ghouls stopped pursuing the kid and turned to chase him down. He could also hear the heavy footfalls of the giant behind him. He would only have one chance to do this, and he had to do it quickly. How many times had Doug fired that fresh magazine? 4? That left 12 rounds. Jack executed a somersault, grabbing the Glock 17 and coming to a kneel. He squeezed off a shot, angled slightly right, left, and let out another. Then shifted all his weight to the right, as 2 fists came crashing down into the sand. Debris flew up, Jack recovering, face to face with Ed. "Your turn." Jack emptied the remaining 10 rounds of the magazine into Ed's ankle, dodging a meaty right hook, then threw a forceful kick into the pock-marked flesh. The bone gave way with a crunch, and the giant buckled. He fell to the ground, his leg useless, his foot held on by a tendon. Jack easily backed up now. "Okay, Jack, you lived. What's next?" He breathed heavily. Ed was chomping his teeth now as if he were eating the air, crawling towards Jack with ferocious intent. Carry Doug, who could be dead, back to the jeep, and Lance, and the kid? He had to decide fast. His gaze shifted to the north as movement caught his eye. More zombies were coming. With a quick glance, having to be mindful of the fast-crawling Ed, he estimated 2 dozen. The kid first. He broke toward the Suburban, finding the friend of Kyle out cold. He stirred, so maybe not out cold. No time for a diagnosis, though. Jack hefted the young man over his shoulder in a fireman carry, just like Kyle had done with the girl. He turned to skirt around Ed, but the creosote bushes at the top of the embankment rustled, and more zombies poked their faces and limbs out, tangled in the shrubs on their way down into the wash. Jack sighed, turning and taking the opposite sandy wall up and into the desert in the footsteps of Kyle, who had departed just minutes before. "I'll bring the cavalry with me," the seasoned special agent muttered, wondering if it would be better or worse for Lance and Doug to be alive right now.